You're listening to the Institute of Commissioning and Assurance, where commissioning isn't a phase, it's project leadership. Unlock the systems-based approach that is reshaping delivery of today's most complex infrastructure projects, from energy systems to industrial processes to transport systems, plus much more. Say no to project failure and say yes to value creation, accountability, and successful project outcomes. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode from the Institute of Commissioning and Assurance. My name is Paul Turner, and we've got a very exciting presentation for you here today announcing our technical committees. Now, Institute of Commissioning and Assurance is a nonprofit institute. We're conducting research, and we're really setting the bar for project delivery to not only deliver outputs, but deliver operational outcomes on projects, which is, of course, the most important part, right? So today I'm joined with David Tain and Alan Cajueiro. How are you guys today?
Doing good, man. Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Awesome. Yes, we've got a discussion today announcing a new initiative from the Institute of Commissioning Assurance on the launch of our technical committees, with the first one being discussed today on operational readiness. So, David, why don't I turn it over to you, and you can tell us a little bit about the initiatives we've got going here at ICxA and the technical committees.
Well, one of the things, no, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here, and good morning and good evening, or whatever you guys are across the globe. So one of the key initiatives we're trying to achieve here, is establishing with the technical committees. But what problem are we trying to tackle here, right? I think that's the most overarching question that we have, and it's essentially, if I want to put that in a short statement, we are trying to tackle the problem of going from value realization to predictable operations across the globe, right? So that means the industry, one of the things that we find in the ICxA is that the industry is flooded projects that deliver scopes, but yet we still are failing at delivering value. And this value is leaked in multiple ways, right? So in multiple ways, attributable to multiple variables. The one that we are most concerned about is the leakage, the value leakage during the transition to operations, right? So see, it is really interesting to see how this value erodes coming from relatively controlled variables in execution doing now when you start pressing the button and start bringing system to life, right? So that a lot of new variables emerge, and we find that although scopes are technically complete, organizations are not ready to receive the asset, right? So of course, all these values leaked through improvisation, new modes of trying to do actions in the field, and that translates into different modes of failure that come from financial hits to, in the worst case scenarios, we do have a safety incidents, right? So when we talk about readiness, Paul, we're talking about, and I want to make sure that we emphasize that term, is an organizational capability that goes beyond execution, right? So because this capability is about integrating the asset with processes, the people, and the organizational systems. If I want to encapsulate, sorry, that in one statement, and that's something that I'm a crusader since years of executing operational readiness programs, is completeness. We can consider like completeness is a milestone, but readiness is a capability. So the ICxA technical committees are emerged precisely to understand, address these key challenges with the amalgamation of professionals across the world and trying to make smooth transitions from projects to operations. We are what I call the catalyst of transformation. And what exactly are we transforming? We are transforming the execution ecosystem from being scope delivery oriented to outcome assurance, right? So I think that's pretty much the reason of existence and what is the problem that we're trying to tackle at a global level.
Makes sense. Tell me a little bit more about the technical committee structure.
The technical committee structure is about three branches, right? So the first branch is the branch of commissioning. The second branch is operational readiness. And the third branch is about outcome assurance. And one of the things that we find that it's really important for us to capture this collective experience across the world because this knowledge exists. One of the things that I found is that this knowledge exists all across the industry in different sectors. It is not integrated, right? So depending where you go, you're gonna have, and actually I'm facing that right now. you're going to have different understandings of how to do commissioning, how to do operational readiness, and what actually effective transition to operation is, right? So some areas you're going to find that they are super technically savvy, but also some other regions, they don't have a basic understanding of how to conduct commissioning, right? So if you park that aside and you also now introduce the variable that the advancement, the rapid advancement of technology, you can see this technology is also advancing at different paces, at different geography, different industries, right, across the world. So we are here oriented to interconnect all this knowledge and distill the best of it in the form of standards and best practices, right? So that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're actually witnessing that, and particularly with the year that I have been with the ICxA, have been actually seeing that in my region. I'm from Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean. We have professionals from multiple industries. We have power systems here in Canada. We have, I mean, I come from the oil sands. We have professionals in the oil sands here in Alberta. But also you do have professionals in the mining industry in Chile. You do have data centers and green buildings, smart buildings, sorry, in Mexico, right? We're working actually in electrical vehicles production.
Mhm.
We also have in Brazil, we do have natural gas producers. We even have some sophisticated areas that to me are new. In Scandinavia, in particularly Norway, we do have the aquaculture industry, right? So that is brand new
Mhm.
to me. Our vice president in
Yeah.
Scandinavia, James, is actually comes with that level of expertise that brings that. So the idea is you take the best of all this knowledge, you put in a pool, and you distill into the form of best practices and global standards.
One of the challenges we definitely see in the industry is our wise experts that have been doing this for years. They're retiring and they're taking all this knowledge with them, right? So let's talk specifically, Alan, about the operational readiness committee. Is what are we doing to actually capture that knowledge so that it doesn't disappear with our wise experts and have that knowledge base to pass to the younger new generation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Even within the same company, we see those siloed informations, let alone across all industries. So documenting, I think, is very relevant to capturing what we have as available because we are not reinventing the wheel. The technical committees are not bringing up new knowledge. It's mostly around what do we do best within our industries that we could disseminate and cross-pollinate and standardize together. And we also, as a technical committee, be a kind of a segue collecting real life product information. So we're documenting practices and we're going to cross reference against. I know you're going to mention something about benchmarking in the future comments, but just get a segue to that conversation. Lighting up what we have as a documentation with the practice that and the results that we're seeing. And I think this is one of the key roles of the initial conversations we're having with the committee. We're going to have much more expanded conversations, but documenting what we have is really solid. I've been working over the past 20 years with Operation Readiness. I know some of you are also even more time than that. And all this knowledge is not well registered yet.
And not well established in organizational practices either, right? It's kind of ad hoc and some do it well and some maybe
Yes.
leave it as an afterthought. So building up this body of knowledge, how is this really going to help the industry to standardize processes and set that benchmark of what organizational excellence looks like to deliver projects?
What I can tell you is in terms of the mandate of the technical committees, and we're actually doing this all in practice, right? So because it's really important to put this in how does it look this in practice? The first thing I can see this from three perspectives, right? The first thing is documenting all this evidence-based practice and methodology and converting to a global body of knowledge, right? So converting all this experience into formal framework standards and guidance, and of course strengthening the ICxA standards, right? So eventually, as we advance in time, as we gather more experience, all these standards are going to be more robust, and the frameworks and the methodologies are going to grow exponentially, right? Another important thing that I see, Paul, building on what Alan mentioned about that, is these technical forums are incubators of ideas, and they collect and analyze real project case studies, right? So by doing that, we are trying to professionals and industries and organizations are going to be able to identify trends, patterns, and even more. We're going to be able to, or the entire ecosystem is going to be able to identify capabilities gaps, which is exactly the core concept here, right? So, as we mentioned, and we repeat over and over, or operational readiness is a capability, and the idea is just find where these capabilities gaps are, and that's where the efforts of the ICxA as well are doing with the benchmarks, right? All this knowledge is spilled over into this benchmarking that organization can access and see how they're sitting with their peers, right? So it's really, really an ambitious and really exciting initiative that we are opening, and I think with a tremendous technical potentials across the world. And also, one of the things that I find, and building on what I mentioned about the different understanding, by doing all this, we're going to end with a global common terminology and conceptual models that are going to actually harmonize the understanding and equally deploy all these initiatives across the globe, across all the industries, right? So we're not going to have this divergence that we have right now. We're now essentially leading the global standards of commissioning, outcome assurance, and operational readiness.
Harmonized understanding. That would be wonderful if everybody had the same vocabulary and was speaking the same language. It would make working on projects so much easier for sure if everyone had a common understanding. Now, you mentioned capability gaps, and I think that's important because lots of organizations, of course, have strong capabilities to track and manage cost and track and manage schedule and safety, and all of those things are very important, right? But we often find that there's a capability gap in actually governing, managing outcomes, and getting through that transition from construction to commissioning and operations and into an operational asset. So how is the technical committees, Alan, going to help kind of bridge this gap and maybe help organizations understand where some of their strengths are, or maybe some of their gaps are, and get access to this body of knowledge to help address some of those gaps in organizational capability?
Yep. So one of the things we stand that that's a collaborational tool. So the standards from ICxA is not a mandate from ICxA, is a dialogue with the industry and bringing back this validation that, because sometimes OR practitioners, they feel lonely in the organization because they're the ones, they have that knowledge within that company, but they're not always heard. But when they have an external reference saying that, hey, everyone else or the good practice outside of our own company are those, they have a much better subsidy to come back and say, we should do that because those are the consequences if you're not doing. So that the loneliness is a little more compensated by, hey, I have factual data from multiple industries that this is the way to go. So that's very reassuring for the OR practitioner, because many times they're designated, you are the OR lead, go, but the culture of the company is not aligned with what we need. So it's a transcultural moment that we provide. It's not only the documentation, but setting a reference that people can use back to discuss with their leadership is a very strong thing. And it's really about not just the what we do, but how we do things. Knowledge sometimes is there, like, hey, we need to ramp up, we need to commission, but the details of how we do, what are the best sequencing, what are the best tools, this is something that we as a technical body can build and say, hey, these are the best tools in the market, or these are the best steps in the market, go that way because that's better. So as a technical committee, we're supporting them going a level deeper, not just what you need to do, but how is the best approach to doing things.
Definitely, for sure. And that technical dialogue, I think, is very important. So what are some of the things, David, that the technical committees are structuring to encourage and foster this technical dialogue, maybe from a knowledge perspective, from a research perspective, or from a general knowledge dissemination to the industry to help people address some of these items?
Interesting. So we have actually right now a multiple set of initiatives that are running in parallel. The first one is these collective forums of focus studies areas from multiple professions, right? So equally to what we're doing right now, we're coordinating some technical meetings focus on a specific topic, right? So of commissioning, outcome assurance, or operational readiness, right? So that is going to come. These forums are going to come from different regions. We're going to have one in Latin America soon, highlighted probably in Spanish or Portuguese. And we're going to start analyzing the data centers, right? So that's going to be in the next month if everything aligns perfectly. But at the same time, besides all these knowledge networks, we're also establishing alliances with technical institutions and universities, right? So a good example that we have right now is in Adelaide, University of Adelaide. We're actually having some conversations with professors at the University of Adelaide. We also have in Chile, we have some conversations with Technical Institute, because it's not only the practice, right? So we're trying with this to distill the best possible form of knowledge, and that combines theory from well-structured frameworks with the actual field, boots on the ground
Mhm.
practice, right? So initiatives are happening in the form of technical forums, research initiatives, contacts with universities and contact with technical institutes. And also the whole idea is all this knowledge, as I mentioned before, is going to be captured in the form of best practices, resources to members, of course, methodologies, and ultimately what we want to achieve, what we are achieving right now, is progressively adjust and adapt our standard, which, by the way, our standards and the ICxA standards has to be industry agnostic, right? So that's the reason why this capability needs to be industry agnostic, needs to be general enough to be applicable to all industries, yet has to be guidance for all these particular cases, particular industries to apply as a methodology and enhance their capabilities and processes in the organization.
Now, if we look specifically at operational readiness, Alan, this seems to be one of the areas that companies maybe aren't as familiar with or don't have the more elevated capabilities to address, where we see projects kind of struggle at the end and make that transition. So from your perspective, why do you think this is maybe an unknown or underdeveloped function that companies have to deliver projects?
A few aspects of it being on the shoes of being an operational readiness manager back in the day, it is really an invisible type of work. In projects, you assemble a facility, you develop, you build things, but building an operational readiness is most of the cases invisible, because you're talking about the right sequencing, the right activities, training people. Those things are not seen by the project organization, is not visible, and being something that's not always tangible during the early phase, because it's very tangible in ramp up. The consequences of poor operational readiness are very visible during ramp up, but not yet visible during the project phase. The other thing is not seen as a company-wide responsibility. We assign an operational readiness team, and hey, you do you. We keep going with the project. There's no appreciation of it is a supply chain discipline, it is a project developed discipline, it is an environmental and social discipline, because operational readiness is really transitioning this whole project into a living organism that will last for the 20, 30 years ahead. So understand that as a multidisciplinary approach, and also dashboarding and digital solutions and the ways that we manage products are not always relatable to operational readiness. So we need to see what are the metrics, underlying metrics, that we need to monitor as an operational readiness. We might have, hey, like we have all the vendor documentation, we have all the drawings, yeah, but how does that translate into operational procedures, into maintenance plans? How do we transition the project documentation into the things that we do and use in the day-to-day? I think these are one of the key challenges: invisibility of the function, the multidisciplinary approach. I think those are two key issues that I see as operational readiness practitioner.
Alan mentioned a really good couple of points, Paul, something that we as operational readiness professionals understand. Absolutely, is the invisibility of the work, right? So you cannot see physically tangible, I mean, the same way that you see project assets being built in the field, right? So, and of course, because of this invisibility and also the intersection of all these cross function, organizations assume that each of these departments are going to, especially large organizations when you have mega projects, organizations assume that each person, each unit is going to do their job, and they are going to be doing it. But unless you are intentionally integrating it, right, it's not going to happen. So organizations, because of this division of tasks, they think that this responsibility and operational readiness is going to merge naturally, right, by actually checking what is the status of each of the individual functions and entities. That's one of the things important. Because of these failure cases that organization experience and value leakage, they tend to rely a lot on digital silver bullet solutions. And I actually mentioned that in a couple of documents that I wrote in the past. It is indiscriminate tendency to adopt digital solutions, silver bullets, that are not in line with the organizational, not in synchrony with the organizational architecture, right? So eventually, what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of investment, there's a lot of efforts. These efforts are going to become sunk costs for the organization, and then instead of driven by efficiencies, organizations are going to be driven by compliance, right? So these devices, these silver bullets, right, so are going to be compliance devices as opposed to be performance enablers, right? So I even see market flooded with books that are disguising actually operating manuals for softwares, right? So saying that these are the silver bullets, this is the only thing, selling amazing, beautiful dashboards. But at the end of the day, unless the organization is in line with the software, the digital solution, right, it is not going to happen. So the digital solution should follow the operational readiness needs of the organization
Exactly.
and not the other way around. And
Mhm.
that is one of the key words that I always mention every time that we talk about operational readiness. This is software agnostic. Same thing that is industry agnostic has to be software agnostic. The software needs to follow the needs of the organization and not the other way around. There are no silver bullets for operational readiness because this is a higher order capability beyond execution.
Projects are only getting more complex, so that higher order of capability definitely is required to plan, execute, and integrate today's complex projects. So, Alan, how are the technical committees, particularly the operational readiness technical committees, going to help organizations with this challenge to raise the bar to those higher levels, orders of capability to execute more complex projects?
Yeah, so one of the words I like to use in those situations, I like to see that we are raising advocates. We are raising people who will come to the technical committees, get their knowledge leveled up, and become evangelists of good OR practice in their organizations, even peers, because they have connections with other companies and other departments, and be the people who disseminate that back to their organizations, and not just about the what's in house, but also the wins. I think the awareness of what we do is important, but understanding the early approach to operational readiness is like very striking to some people. See that, hey, the last 6 months are great. No, the last 6 months, we're already too late for a lot of operational readiness activities. So we can be advocates on the what, hows, and especially the wins. And also, we want the technical committees to be able to support our members into creating value proposition. We know it's true, we know it's necessary, but we don't always have the tools within ourselves to say, hey, your impact is going to be by that much. That's where benchmarks are going to play a key role and say, hey, you're going to probably miss by that much in cost or schedule or be at risk, because we have the support of this is the value proposition of operational readiness. We want to empower our members to go back and say, I'm advocating for that because I know the consequences, I know the value proposition. And thirdly, we, even David mentioned, we are going to be a multicultural, multi-geography, and multi-industry body. And that's very powerful because we can learn a lot from each other. In some practices, I see not only geographies, but also industries are far more advanced than others. And having that opportunity of having that conversation, we won't embrace everything from multiple industries, but there's a lot of things that, hey, you guys are onto something that I'm not. I can just leverage that and start building on that and adapting, because David said a very powerful thing about tools. Tools can only do so much as we know that we need, and the KPIs that we need, and the process that we need to manage. So create that awareness of languages, geographies, and industries, because you might be siloed in a country that in your language you don't have the material available, but have a lot in another language. And we, as a multi-language committee, we can understand. And also this cross-cultural thing is really about how we approach things. Some countries or some cultures, we are more like execution driven, highly technical, but not always prone to organizing things. I admit that myself, that this cross-cultural approach to my career opened my eye to different ways of approaching things that are more process oriented. So I became a more process-oriented person with a strong execution background. And some people are backwards. They have nice documentation, very well organized, but they don't have the grit to execute. And this cross-cultural environment is going to be very beneficial. And my key message with the committees is like, you are not alone. You are not alone in your journey as an OR practitioner. You are not alone in your journey to convince organizations that those things are necessary. And you're not alone in building cases that operational readiness is a key success factor for project execution and for the healthy, safe operations.
If I may add, you're absolutely right, Alan. And one of the key things that you well articulate in terms of the you're not alone and the transformation, we are right now witnessing a really important transformation. And I can emphasize that we're transforming the whole execution ecosystem, the whole global execution ecosystem, from being scope delivery oriented to outcome assurance oriented, right? So, and that all these structured environments that we are fostering, all this incubation is actually going to distribute this cross pollination to raise that bar. And something that come here up to my mind from this cross pollination, one of the things, the first thing that came that I realized when I came to Canada, we have a lot of constraints where they're prohibitive costs, right? So one of the key things that I realized shortly when I came almost 20 years ago from Venezuela is how concepts used offshore in terms of modularization are being used to make more effective modular construction and cheaper, I mean, more cost effective modular construction up in the North Alberta, where the temperatures and the condition, the environmental conditions are so aggressive. So any second, any time, any moment that you save is critical for the organization, and value can leak in a split of a second, any mistake that you do, right? So raising the bar is engaging in this transformation, in this global transformation of the entire execution ecosystem. And notice that I don't talk about industry. I'm talking about the entire execution ecosystem, right? So companies, vendors, professionals, right? So it is an entire changing mindset that the ICxA is successfully achieving across the world.
And there's a lot of smart people out there with lots of years of experience. How do they get involved, David, in this transformation? If they want to get involved in the technical committees, if they want to contribute knowledge, if they want to build on this body of knowledge that we're putting together, what would you recommend?
The first thing is just contact us, right? So, I mean, you contact the ICxA, contact your local leader, contact us directly, right? So we join the movement, become a member, and start participating in this. Have access, because that's one of the key benefits as a member, that you have not only the access to standards and practices, but also the access to this powerful global network, right? So you're going to be sitting, getting knowledge and sharing, as I mentioned at the beginning. You're going to learn and contribute at the same time. It's a two-way street, right? So where you're going to share ideas, you're going to have access to this network of global professionals. And as a matter of fact, right now we might have them. And yesterday we were having a 6 a.m. I mean, so some crazy hours, but yesterday, Paul, you and I were 5:30 a.m. with a meeting with Scandinavia and Australia, right? So, and we're sharing ideas. We're seeing what's happening in the other side of the world that we can implement here, and vice versa, right? So we're essentially, the ICxA has a powerful mission of structuring all these environments and cross-pollinate and integrate all this knowledge. So the first thing, Paul, is join the movement, join the ICxA. Have a look into the webpage. It's a lot of resources. And if that resonates to you, we're here to help.
Excellent. I've got a few slides I want to show everybody on what our benchmarking program looks like. And then I see there's some questions in the chat that we'll go through after that. So if you do have any more questions, shoot them in the chat. We'll definitely get to them here shortly. So it's clear from this discussion and from projects that Project Complete is no longer enough, right? We need to get past just delivering the scope of building things, but we need to actually deliver operational outcomes, which is the reason that projects are started for in the first place, right? So this is what we're putting together, is the knowledge base that's out there, and combining this with our technical committees in the body of knowledge to help people get through this complex transition at the end of projects. And this is what organizations get when they get involved in ICxA, is our benchmarking program. It's easy for us to gauge and gather some information on capabilities across the organization, whether there's strengths in governing outcomes, we can evaluate and monitor that. strengths for system integration, for operational readiness, of course, performance validation, and ultimately outcome delivery. So this is what organizations will receive, is a maturity map like this that maps out strengths and weaknesses across the organization to actually deliver project outcomes. This is super helpful for organizations to know where they compare to the industry baseline, where they compare to maybe other industry peers that you're working with, to know what areas are you strong in, or what are some areas that ICxA can help to advance and elevate some of those capabilities. And this is often how organizations get involved with ICxA, is first becoming a corporate member. That kind of opens the door to access all of the knowledge, all of the systems, and that also gets organizations access to their outcome assurance index score, the chart that I just showed on the previous slide there, to understand your capabilities. That's an easy first way for organizations to engage with ICxA. And then as time progresses, there's lots of other ways to engage as well. For example, getting involved in the technical committees. There's certification programs, training exams to elevate some team development, a full benchmarking and capability report. There's lots of resources when organizations become members, and I definitely encourage you to reach out and get involved. So before we jump into the questions, David, if there was one thing that you could tell organizations out there about operational readiness, technical committees, what would you say to, say, an executive, a VP that's sitting across from the table that's about to embark on a large capital project?
The first thing that I would say, that the most important thing is that now we are in a transitional stage, right? So we are now developing organizational capabilities. We're not here providing tools. We're not at an execution level. We're beyond that, right? So we want organizations to be successful at execution through formal processes, through formal methodologies, through a well-established, evidence-based processes that they can implement, right? So that, to me, ultimately, the main interest of an organization is stop any possibility of value leakage and predictability, right? So predictability is one of the key descriptors of organizational success. And the more you are able to predict how your operations are going to be, how your transition is going to be, and where are your gaps in value, that's going to make increase your competitiveness as a peer, as an industry, and across, as I always mention, across the execution ecosystem.
And how about from yourself, Alan? If you were sitting across the table from an executive that's about to embark on a large capital project, what would be the word that you would leave them with, or the impact you would want to make to help set them on the right direction for operational readiness?
I would say that operational readiness is the risk mitigation tool that you need, but you probably are not well aware of right now. So I would caution them to say, hey, it's a small investment now that avoids a lot of risk afterwards. That's totally worthwhile invest in it.
You know, it's interesting, Paul. I mean, I'm just going to interject here for a second, because a lot of people, and the cost factor is really important. So a lot of people say, well, how much this is going to cost me? Even there are some detractors in multiple areas say, well, this is going to cost money. Normally, the commissioning and operational readiness effort in a project, in large scale projects, asset intensive projects, it would not represent more than 5 or 6%. Okay, so this is the key thing, right? So, but the criticality of this function, and this is something that executive and professional at the equally need to understand, is that the impact of this 6%, which don't even actually equate to the normal contingency that you have in a cost estimate, right? So that is 10%. So it's less than that. So you're trying to save money, or you're trying to not even save, cut capabilities that actually are going to impact your asset in multiple ways, right? So this 6% is what is going to save you from, as Alan mentioned, the risk is going to save you either from blowing up a $20 million equipment, or even worse, killing somebody, right? So I mean, that is that 6%, right, at the startup and the transition of operations.
Yep, and it's critically important. Agreed. Okay, I see there's some good questions in the chat, so let's jump into some of those questions. And as we're going through those questions, anyone that's watching, if you have other questions, shoot them in the chat and we'll be able to get to them. So Ray's got a question. I've seen in the past the construction is near completion. We're pushing the button tomorrow, but here are procedures, checklists that need to be completed prior. Also, you need to transition to customer procedures. I see this gap that can be closed and maybe should be closed. So what are your thoughts on that one, Alan?
So that's the early engagement that we are not always aware of at this time. It's already too late because they embark operations in most cases 3 months prior, 2 months prior to build all those things. So we need to be more preventative in our approach. We need to give them the message that this is an effort that was not measured during the project phase. That will take a lot of time, and it does take a toll on the ramp up to do, unfortunately.
All right, next question. Individuals working with Shell and now with BP, I have seen the operational readiness team is a bunch of specialists and act as subject matter experts cross-function. We know the end and make it happen at the earliest. Safety, reliable, and for a steady operation. Do you have any follow-up comments to that one, David?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, that's interesting. When you talk about BP, Shell, I mean, they do have the industry-led practices, right? So you do have the flawless execution from Shell, the MCAP from ExxonMobil, the system from, I mean, particularly me, that they work as well with both and in Total, right? So you have their personal system. I mean, all of these systems are are company based, right? So, I mean, we're talking about large multi-billion dollar super majors, right? So definitely, they do have, but still, when you actually look at the details, these projects delivers, but trying to maintain value, trying to sustain value once you push the button and building into the previous questions, right? So they are experts, but it doesn't mean one key example is Kashagan. You can see a multi-billion dollar cash again, right? So you could see there was a multi-billion dollar value leakage in that project, right? So big corporations, although they have, and I can tell you that they have tremendous experts, they're not immune to this. They're not immune
Mhm.
to operational readiness leakage. So talking about processes, these multi-billion corporations, they do have strong processes because they have a huge financial muscle for sure, and also they do have their own research and development areas, right? So areas that have become goalposts in the industry, but we cannot confuse that the fact that these experts exist, these experts are also at the mercy of the organization and the technology and systems. So we're talking about a socio-technical problem, right? So that no matter the size, no matter the project, no matter the organization, and how well established the system is, you will always have some potential for value leakage.
Romario's got a question on the pulp and paper sector. So Brazil is experiencing one of the largest modernization cycles in pulp and paper with increasingly complex and integrated assets. We are currently investing heavily in automation, digitalization, and new assets in Brazilian mills. In your view, is the readiness challenge more related to technology or the human factor? And who should ensure that both are truly ready before startup? Alan, what are your thoughts on that one?
So operational readiness is a team, but also a responsibility across the project. So who is responsible? It needs to be a team within the project working as the same body. It should be a one team approach. And early enough, like we always discuss, early enough. So technology or the human factor, I would say that's both, because David alluded to technology responds to processes. The process responds to people, and then how we thinking of what we're going to need to operate will define the technology, not the opposite. So we need better processes, stronger processes that are developed by the operational teams working in harmony with the project teams.
In terms of responsibility as well, operational readiness is two things. It's an overarching function that goes from, because it's a bridge from from the projects to operations, but also in terms of what is a problem if human is technical. Operational readiness by definition is a socio-technical challenge. And that's
Mhm.
something that we need to understand, right? So by doing that, you see that, as I mentioned in the previous answer, you can have the top experts in the world, but if you don't address this interface between humans and technology, and address this socio-technical challenge, you're gonna leak value, right? So that is a big thing. So it's an overarching function, but also we need to conceptualize that as a socio-technical challenge.
Absolutely. Here's an interesting one, and I feel that I need the same picture that is in the background there. We've commented on the just before we went live, wondering whether you were on the either end of the same water and the bridge in the background.
We
Thanks for noticing,
realized
and I feel
that
left
this
out
morning.
because I don't have that too.
The only
I
difference
need
is
a picture
because
like
Alan
that
is
too.
going to a mountain, I'm going to the sea. So that's the
This is much colder water.
yeah.
Anna's got a question. OR is about confirming the business case of a project. You can build an asset on time and on budget, but it doesn't deliver value. Then your business case is eroded. What are your thoughts on that one, David?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you're absolutely right. So you pretty much have the potential to erode the value generation potential of your asset, right? So therefore your business case, right? So when you start developing a project, when you start developing an idea, you come from a set of value generation assumptions, right? So you cannot realize that until you push the button and emerge in this dangerous transition from relatively controlled environment to now a dynamic environment where commodities are coming and real life conditions are happening, right? So, and this is really the most important reason why operational readiness and engaging progressively and early enough an operational readiness effort is a robust effort is important, because it actually is going to preserve the business case. It's going to preserve the value generation of your corporation. It's going to preserve assumptions that you generated upfront at the front end of your project, right? So I can't overemphasize enough how critical is coming from this transition from static systems to actually a dynamic condition where push a button and a lot of things happening and improvisation happen. As soon as you start hearing that, or as soon as you start engaging in improvisation efforts, your business case is eroded, and you're gonna have now a recovery effort. It's a total different. We're talking about a total different conversation, right? So, but you're absolutely right, Anna.
And David, just one thing interesting in that comment that's very well pointed out from by Anna is that we started with the business case. We get lost in the process. We're here to build. We're here to put 25 million tons per annum of ore in a ship in the beginning, and we build a project for that. But as we're building the project, it becomes about completion, about delivering the equipment. But the actual business case is sometimes forgotten along the way. So the value proposition is what began with, and what we carry. That's the end goal, and we get lost in times as organizations, unfortunately.
And there's a lot of risk that's involved in that transition process, right? The risk that ultimately, if not managed, erodes the business case. So
Yes.
it's critically important, of course, to have that outcome focused at the beginning, not have it get lost along the way, and focus on preserving that value and delivering outcomes in the end. All very good points for sure. All right, Lionel's got a question for OR. The biggest starting point is the operating strategy. I've seen this missing on a lot of projects. If we don't know how we want to operate the facility and define what we want to achieve, then how will you ever be able to plan the activities for operational readiness to achieve this strategy? Very valid point for sure. The operating strategy can drive both the project design side, asset, as well as the operational readiness side, people, process, and systems, and is critical as a starting point and should be developed early on in the project. I absolutely agree with that one. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, it's interesting because that comment actually brought me to my really early times in my career, my first times, my first step as a project engineer. And of course, as I said, I had really great bosses and great mentors. And I remember I was actually in this 30% model review. And I remember I started just taking the attendance, and I saw the operations team was not there. And of course, I was torn because, all these teams were, coordinated. Everybody was in the room, everybody was waiting. And I made a really risky call early. I'm talking about literally 20 years ago. I just canceled the meeting. I just say we can't have this meeting, right? Because I'm not gonna wait until the design is already, to start discussing about operational philosophies, or even accessing the field, operation parameters, yelling off PNIDs, and even I'm not sure if that can be resonating with the operations conditions. I don't have real life experience, so I was actually, it's interesting because that comment brought me to a really stressful moment in my early career. But I knew somehow that I was doing the right thing, so I canceled the 30% model review, and it was not until, and I was highly supported by the organization that I was working for. It was not until the operations team was formally invited and confirmed that we actually started doing that. And we're talking about 30% model review in detailed design. The operation team, the operational readiness team, need to actually start defining. So you can't enter in detailed design if you do not understand, or you don't have at least a basic understanding of your operating parameters, how you're going to operate the facility, right? So you can't move towards that, because eventually this is not about constructing a facility. This is not about putting a bunch of concrete and steel in the ground, or pipe. It is about operating a facility. It's about getting a throughput and an output. Well, that's what the project is about, not having a beautiful, exotic building, right? So, and that's is exactly what Alan mentioned. It gets lost in the process. It's about producing. It's not about constructing.
All right, lots of good questions, and we'll leave it there for now. Let's maybe conclude with some closing remarks. Alan, what would you like to leave the group with here?
That I am excited to be part of this technical committee, and this body we're building globally and across industries is going to generate exciting documentation and conversations. And I'd like to invite everyone to be part of this conversation. It's going to be good for all of us.
And how about from yourself, David? What would you like to leave the group with?
With the group, as I mentioned, really excited to be part of this global movement. We're tapping everywhere in the world in different geographies. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a transformation of the execution ecosystem from being scope delivery driven to outcome assurance, right? So that is the most important message that I think. And all these technical committees are going to help distilling all this information, cross-pollinating from multiple geographies, from multiple disciplines, from multiple perspectives, with real case evidence experts, to distill and cross-pollinate this knowledge to create the most optimal solution that can be applicable to specific projects and specific cases.
And these are the organizations that will win and succeed in the next decade of projects delivery, is the organizations that are focusing on outcomes, not just outputs. So I definitely encourage everyone, if you're watching live, or if you're watching this replay, to reach out to ICxA, become a member, see how you can get involved, and see how you can tap into this institutional knowledge to elevate your organization's capabilities to deliver project outcomes and deliver project excellence. So thanks everyone for joining today. Really appreciate all the questions. Lots of good feedback. Thanks, David, and thanks, Alan, for the great conversation, and looking forward to next week's presentation. Watch your email, watch LinkedIn, and hope to see you there. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks for listening. Are you ready to lead infrastructure projects with purpose and accountability? Join the movement at ICxA.net and unlock exclusive resources, from global standards to project delivery reform and career development certification programs. Visit ICxA.net for more information.